Welcome to the Finding Your Purpose podcast. My name is Monica Hohe. I'm a psychotherapist, conscious coach, and someone passionate about helping people take steps towards living with clarity and purpose. In this 6-part series, I'll be speaking with individuals who are aligning with their purpose and are an inspiration to others to find theirs. I hope the conversations in this podcast encourage you to find yours. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Rita Fagan, local and global community activist. Rita is from a working class family in the Liberties and spent all of her life, I'd say, agitating and building change. She has travelled widely and been involved politically in the issues affecting Palestine, Central America in general, and Cuba. She led the protest outside the US Embassy challenging US foreign policy in the region for 9 years or more. So Rita will be well able to explain her own story, but welcome, Rita. It's great to have you today.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
So Rita, can you tell us, this podcast is all about purpose and how people find their purpose, live from their purpose. And you came to mind quite quickly as somebody who's always been very purposeful from as long as I know you. When I first met you as full-time volunteers in the Simon community, you were a woman who knew what you're about. So will you tell our listeners a little bit about your story and how you found your purpose?
Okay, I'm Rita Fagan and I come from the Liberties, which is the old part of Dublin. I'm working class and I have that working class culture where I didn't go to the college early. I left school at 13 and a half and I went to the factory with the purpose of getting a vanity case. So that was my purpose. And my mother's purpose was that I needed to go to work because that was the background of our lives in working class communities. When I was in the factory, I learned how to make coats. I learned how to do lots of things, but I got involved in the Simon community at the time, which would not have been normal because those in the flats wouldn't be going towards those kind of places. So I just happened to get a handout and I went to a meeting and I landed in the shelter, which was on Sarsfield Quay. And back then it wasn't the Simon of the day, of today. It was the Simon of yesterday, which was a poor Simon, and it was based on the principles of volunteerism. Now, I didn't know about volunteerism either, but I was able to go into the shelter with winos, all kinds of people who were left out of society. And I suppose I was able to do that because I came from a mother who was very community orientated, very active in the community. And I suppose I got that purpose from her. So that led me into a life of, working with those who were more marginalised.
Great. And so when you were in the factory, you sort of were drawn to this work that Simon did and the work with homeless people. But also I think that you're quite politicised through being in the factory and that art exhibition, you might mention that, but the image of you with your sewing machine faced to the wall, that seemed to be quite a moment that sort of, that maybe shifted you towards even a more clarity about your purpose. You might tell our listeners about that.
Okay, so when I was in the factory at 16, the cutters who cut the coat, who did all the mail work, they decided to go on strike and they never told the women who were 75% of the factory. So they had joined the union and they didn't unionise us. So that meant that we had to pass the picket. We weren't unionised and most of the people needed to have work. So it was something that was very political. I had my mother saying, you're going to work. And on the block where I lived, across from the factory, a big trade union just was shouting down at me, you're a scab. And it was a very big moment and I have a scar that I passed that picket.
Yeah.
But I passed it and I'd collect money in the factory for the strikers. And so I was able to keep the relationship between the strikers and the factory workers. We did resistance inside. We slowed down on the work and we wouldn't do things the bosses asked us. And then when the strike was over, which was after 15 weeks, the trade union fella asked me to go on to the trade union. So that began to politicise me in a different route. I was now getting involved in the trade union. I was involved in Simon. I was linking the factory to Simon because when I'd go to the shelter to volunteer in a tourist, and all the cups would be gone, and I had the machinist making cakes to bring down to the shelter to the winos, and we were buying the cups, and so there was a triangle between myself, between the factory, and my life as a community, a working class community person living in communities that, that are local authority, more marginal. They don't, in Simon, you met volunteers from Trinity College and that.
Yeah.
It wasn't that you met loads of people like coming from my class. And I remember once one fella said to me, well, we have books in our home. He was a middle class fella, he was a volunteer. And I said, but we have books in our home also. So there was these two worlds, there are worlds. There's more than one world in Ireland.
Yeah. But so having to pass the strikers and not be part of a union really was poignant for you. You're saying you knew you'd rather be organised and be part of a trade union, yet you hadn't been told.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that. I was 16 and I was experiencing something that I didn't know about trade union. I was only 2 years in the factory. I didn't understand the whole world of trade unionism, but I had the skills, obviously, in me to be able to cross the spaces between those who were organised and those who weren't. And then when we went back into that factory, there was a lot of tension. People wouldn't speak to each other. People were organising themselves in different factories. And so I went to the one that was the one outside. And then I got onto the branch committee. I was on the branch committee with all these lorry drivers. I was growing. I was becoming political. But the part that I suppose made me, as I continued in Simon, because the philosophy of Simon was to take people as they were, to walk with people on that journey. These were people whose families couldn't have them anymore. They were on the streets. And then the other part of Simon was that it's not just about giving soup and sandwiches and a bed. If you didn't challenge the structures of society, well, then you weren't doing anything for those people. So that kind of principles of Simon, the philosophy of organising, because I became the coordinator on the night. I was never only, in my life, I've never found myself in a position of only being one of the gang. I always have to be the leader. I have to be leading. So I ended up as a coordinator. I went on to the executive committee. I went on to the national committees, and I was learning all that stuff. And then people who used to come into Simon, some of them were student priests, and the Columban priests who were missionaries, they came in and we got to know them. And then myself and my friend Fidelma, we got a loan out with the credit union, and we took a very long flight out to Peru, to the barrios. And we thought that poverty, say in Ireland, was bad. In the places that I witnessed there, I saw it. But in Peru, in those communities where the Columban priests worked, it was subhuman poverty. There was people who lived at the top of the hills. They didn't, have any. Their conditions were very bad, and all down at different times you came to those barrios. They called them barrios. But a mile down the road, like Dundrum, you had hotels and people lying on beaches and, having money. And yet a mile up that road, you had people, who barely got food a day, who were marching for water. And yet in 1 mile down the road, they were sprinkling water on their gardens.
You have a very rich story. But so there you are going across to the factory for your vanity case, and then you're this strike, and then working in Simon, roughly around the same time when you saw that the work we did in Simon around the walking with the poor, but you also saw the importance then in the factory of organising, because you missed out on that organising and you became a leader and you became part of a movement which was representing people and trying to maintain their rights. And then you saw the the marginalised people in Simon. So they all fed together into some kind of very purposeful, you were going to agitate for change. You didn't, there were so many inequalities.
Well, I got that from my mother.
All right,
I got the agitation for change from my mother because my mum was involved in the national organisations for tenants, NATO, and they, back in 1968 to 70, were very involved in organising a rent strike. So they organised a rent strike because they were putting the rents up in all the local authority homes. So they organised nationally.
Yeah.
So it was a national movement, and they marched, and they had a rent strike in 1972, and it brought over 100,000 people to the streets. And I was on that picket line with my mother in the rent strike, and they actually, after 18 months, they won that. So that's in my blood. That's in my
But it suited you.
DNA.
It didn't suit your sister. I mean, she took a totally different path. So it suited you as well, Rita. I mean, it's part of you,
it was
isn't it?
also, yeah. Well, Marie kind of was afraid of the teachers in the school. I was never afraid of teachers in the school. And Marie then, when she went to Jacob's factory, so when she went there, she didn't end in the factory because she was able to do maths and things. She ended up in the office. So I ended in the factory, and she had a different ability. Didn't mean I didn't have ability. I had a very different set of abilities. I was able to make coats when I was 16.
Yeah.
You know, so there was...
But so you were brought up with this about fighting for change, really, and you saw that in your mother, and then you saw it in Simon, the importance of pushing for change and helping the marginalised and walking with them. Within the factory, you saw the people who are organised, at least they could represent themselves and agitate for change. But you might also talk about that piece of that exhibition you did with the machine facing the wall that increased productivity. I mean, that would sort of, when I saw that, I thought, oh my goodness, you know, it's a fire in my belly when I saw that.
Well, that was part of my work when I was in the Family Resource Centre, because I have a story before I get to the Family Resource Centre. So when I was in the factory, and a few years later, they closed that factory, and we went to a small factory. And this factory was about 16 workers in it, but they looked for the best. So I was the best. I was able to do a particular kind of machine, and I was able to use buttonholers, and I was able to make coats. So I was one of the best,
right?
With people who had been able to make sample coats and things like that. And then, you know, they felt we weren't doing enough productivity, so they turned all our machines to the wall. But at that stage, I'd been involved in Simon, and I'd got to Latin America, and we'd been influenced by liberation theology, which was, you know, you can't wait for heaven when people are, you know, starving and here on the ground. So that was politicisation as well. And then I was involved in the union in the factory, and they turned our machines to the wall because they weren't getting enough productivity out of us. And they said, give us a reason why that wall affects you. And at that stage, I'd passed whether I needed to be, that was the issue with class. It was kind of in a cage, and I needed to get out. I needed to do something. So I went into Simon full-time, and that's where I met you. So I went into Simon full-time, and then, so when I was coming out of Simon, I hurt my back, and I came out, and my dad was dying and things like that. And then there was, where do you go after that? Because I didn't have education. I left at 13 and a half. So now I'm coming out like I've 14 years done in factories, and I'm going either taking one road or taking the other road. So the road was that a friend said, why don't you go for the community and youth work course in Maynooth? And at that stage, I didn't have a penny to go anywhere because you're in Simon, you didn't get paid. So then I was volunteering down in Sicta, and a nun there said I should go, and she wrote to the Bishop of Dublin, and the Bishop paid for me to go to Maynooth College and so I wrote to people. I wrote to all different religious and different people, and they paid for me bus fare, they paid for me books. So I was owned by that community, really, and it meant I had to get the 2 years where I done placement in Belfast and placement in Community Workers Co-op and that. And then the placement, that was, they were 3-month placements. I went to St. Michael's Estate in Inchicore, and they wanted me back when I was finished. And I went there, had been as a student, and then I went there as the only worker. And then so what happened there was I was there developing the Family Resource Centre, which is a big organisation now. And in that, we built a relationship with the Irish Museum of Modern Art. So that had come to Inchicore, and they wanted a relationship. And in that's where we got into the art. And that's where we made that exhibition, Unspoken Truths, which was where my piece, I brought the strike, I brought the radio, I brought class, I brought far away. You know, that my mother would always say, with your hands, you can never go hungry. So you had a trade. So when I went to El Salvador on human rights, we were seeing people in sheds sewing coats. And then you look across to people who get up in the morning in Brazil who sew different things. And those of us who at that time couldn't buy coats in Arnott, you would have been able to buy coats in pennies or things like that. But we were still in the cycle of capitalism that meant that you didn't have a choice, that you were in that cycle of oppression where you could oppress others. Even though you were poor yourself, the choices you had. I made coats in the factory that you couldn't buy with the wages that you earned, but you could buy them you could buy clothes and pennies. So it shows, so all my piece was about the strike, the men who didn't bother to organise, the women. It was about what kept you alive, what was your purpose. The radio in the factory, all the women sang to the radio.
Wonderful, yeah.
You were making collective work. And then the pieces around your hands are important, but also that you are local and there is global. And, you know, that's the marketplace. And so that was all politicisation. But I was able, in my art piece, to tell that story. Cage aboard, you know, cage aboard and it'll die. I needed, when I left that factory, when I walked out after they said, you know, listen to, you look at the wall and make more coats. I walked out. So that was class. I broke out through that. And I took a journey, a purposeful journey that led me to.
Yeah. So, I mean, that wasn't an easy journey and it was a courageous journey. But so how would you say that you knew what your purpose was? You just did what seemed right and seemed important?
Well, I think, you know, I think my mum and I think my granny and all of them had a purpose. They were in the community. They, like my granny and my mammy, I remember, used to be there with the birth of children and they'd be there at the deaths of people. And I remember being there when my mammy was going off to, before you needled people in their coffins, laying out the dead and that. So that's kind of like, or being kind, or all through her tenants' work. She was always involved with the marginal people. She knew who was vulnerable in the area we lived. And I suppose I got that from her. And then, you know, seeing how people lived here in Ireland in the homeless nature of things, you know, they were out and outers, people who didn't come into shelters, people who had mental health, people who I was able to cross that space. And I suppose I took the principles of Simon, which was take people as they are, work with them, and, you know, use all the skills you have. And I took that into my community work. And so you don't do anything alone, you do it with people. You know, you're never alone in your own purpose or your own struggle. So I found my tribe in that thing about, like, care is moral and care is political. You know, like, so that's where my journey took me.
And do you see yourself as purposeful? I mean, I said at the start, it's so obvious that you're so purposeful. Do you feel that in you? You know, do you see that in yourself, that you're a very purposeful person?
Yeah, I get up in the morning and I have to be purposeful. You know, I get up in the morning and I also have this kind of, I love art. I just love art. And I love words, and I love being able to, and I love protests, and I love using my own voice. And I love connecting with people. And so I'm able, I have some sort of a skill where I can imagine, you know, I can imagine images and because I have the skills of making, I'm able to make things really well, to bring to protest. But with that, I'm able to bring, say, women with me. I've done a lot of work on my life with marginalised women and empowering them. And, you know, like, so I am part of a group called Flames Not Flowers. And my purpose now Now I'm retired, nearly going into 2 years this year, and that was hard to find a space. But I know my way. I'm able to make things, and the last one we did was Bloomsday, Doomsday. We did it on Palestine, and it was my aim to get us up to Michael D, which I did, and I gathered the dresses, made the hats, made the banners, and produced something that was very beautiful and soft, but very challenging in and around Palestine and what's happened in Palestine now, and to be able to use art as a means to voice. So I have loads of purposes. I have 6 cats every night that has to be fed. I have 2 foxes I have purpose.
Very good. So, I mean, you've retired from Michael's estate, but you certainly haven't retired. And it's amazing now that you have more opportunities to be creative and to bring together your ability to sew and, your artwork to the protests and to do the costumes and the banners. And and I also think that you might, because I worked for 35 years as the director of the Family Resource Centre and built that project to been an excellent, challenging project in terms of the structures of society. I also realised that wherever you stand is community. So that you wherever you relate to people will find me. People will have problems. People will find me. And I'm able to work from that basis of meeting people as they are. So that's that. So something, a skill you have. And would you say it hasn't been an easy road, but would you say things have worked out for you because you have listened in? You got the funding for the community work course. You've done the factory, left the factory, done the Simon full time. And then what next? And then things worked out because you still knew you had a purposeful political path to follow. And then it worked out that you got the funding and then you got the job.
Yeah, but I think I am me. And part of my essence is that struggle for justice. And my foundation comes from my family, my mum, particularly my mum and her struggles. And I just also think is that you grow all the time. And, you take, even though I got those pieces of funding, I stayed in relationship with those people. I respected those people who helped me on my journey. And I was able to use them in the collective work of what I did. And I'm able to still use those people in and around getting support for projects that might need to be, get that kind of support. And I think that's about relationship.
And building your network.
And it's your network. But it's also that you have to be believed in. I was also involved very much in the forced community response to violence against women. And that was, that's when I'm saying about believe. You have to believe people, you have to be
And you believed in yourself, Rita, as well. I think that's really important, that you've come from the inside out. You believed in yourself and then you have brought people along with you and met people who are willing to move with you and move forward.
Empowered a lot of leaders.
Yes.
I put a lot of effort into investing in leaders. And even if they moved from communities, they went into other communities and used those skills. And that was about having people participate with you. You don't do life alone. You do life with people. You might think, you're the greatest. Yeah, you're great as yourself, but you need people. You need a team. You need people who won't judge you. You need people who say, yeah, I'll take a risk on you. You need those people in your life to make you be able to fulfill your purpose,
Right. So you're saying, that you need to build relationships, build communities, find your tribe and keep going. Have you ever lost your way with your purpose, would you say?
No, but I was thinking about that question. So I haven't lost my way, but I've burned myself out many a time.
Yes.
I've overdone it many a time. And, I think you have to have lessons of balance. You can't, you can live it every single day, but you need balance, you need beauty, you need art, you need green, you need space. I fractured my spine. I've done a lot of things to myself that maybe I wouldn't if I had been paying attention.
Yeah. And part of the problem with the community project was there was a lot of bureaucracy around it that was needed to tend to fundraising.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Because, just to fight against injustice. Or
never mind all the paperwork around it.
Yeah, and there's so many stories, like the the stories of the austerity and what that did to communities, and how communities were resilient and fought back. And, there's loads of different things. But I think you have to have your focus.
Yeah.
You have to focus. You have to grow your focus. You have to, plan it. Good planning brings good results.
Yeah. And what do you think about this purpose in this whole, that these series is about podcast, and my hope is that more and more people are wanting to actually figure out what their piece of the jigsaw is. Does that come up for you with these people that you're bringing along through, coaching them as leaders? Do you see that more people are wanting to step into what their purpose is, what they want to be doing?
Yeah, I think everybody has purpose.
Yeah.
It depends on what their purpose is. And I think your podcast is very essential in the sense that you can tell all kinds of stories. Like my story is a story of activism.
Yes.
You'll get lots of other stories.
Yeah.
I think the thing about you can't make a tree grow any faster.
Yes.
Okay. So that's why you have to spend time investing in people and value that investment. That brings people, as you say, to whatever the journey is, or wherever the piece is that they want to do. You can't do that for them.
Yes.
You cannot make a tree grow faster than a tree will grow.
And you have supported lots of different trees. So many of them are out marching with you, but others are doing other things, aren't they? Whatever it might be,
there's loads of people I've supported. I've supported lots of artists.
Yeah, wonderful.
Loads of artists have either come to the museum. Like I was on the board, first community worker on the board of IMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, put there by Michael D. Higgins when he was the Minister for the Arts, and that was for 5 years. I was on the board of IMA, and I've been on supporting the Common Ground, which is a community agency, arts agency that works very much at the grassroots and supports artists to become bigger artists. And I was involved in the Spectacle of Defiance and Hope, which was a Dublin-based response to true community arts, to austerity. And that was a very powerful piece of work. And we were also involved in the exhibition Once Is Too Much. That was 17 women, and we worked with 4 artists, and we made a renowned exhibition on violence against women that travelled Ireland for 8 years. And we still have a living piece of that, which are lilies that mark the 200, there's 273 women in Ireland dead by male violence since December 1996. So there's loads of ways you can tell those stories. So there's so much to...
It's great the way that you've combined
about
the activism and the art and the creativity and the crack and the song and dancing. I know you organise the annual International Women's Day over in the Liberties.
Always, fantastic.
Yeah. So listen, what would you say to somebody who's listening thinking, I don't know what my purpose is? How does anybody find their purpose who's listening and thinking, it's great that Rita was so committed and so clear and knew what she was about and saw her mother at it, and then she did your own version of that and more. But someone is listening thinking, I don't really know what to be doing with my life. What would any tips?
Well, I think the world we're in at the moment is a very harsh world, and I don't think we can sit back at all. At all. I think as the standards of internationalism is being challenged, I think we all have a duty, and it's a duty of challenging those people who only want the marketplace of the world, that don't, that we can accept inhumanity in relation to allowing a standard like Palestine. Like what's happening in Palestine is very wrong. And I think people... I can see on the marches, and I can see in different spaces, young people are beginning to become conscious about some of those kind of issues. I think environment is another issue. And I think there's ways into that. You just have to find your path in. But we have to say that we are in a world that we have to change, that we cannot accept being, on the sidelines or in the minorities. If we weren't on the streets, if we weren't voicing about Palestine would be well gone. So we have to hold the moral ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right also that we all have to reclaim our power, and we have to sort of move beyond playing small and thinking we're not really that great, or we're not this, that or the other. I think it's time now
Well,
for us
every
all.
one of us that with our feet on the street, our hands sending some kind of message or showing some sort of solidarity to Palestine, to Sudan, to, Ukraine, to those countries that are being used. They're being used by the arms trade to test weapons. That's what they're about. It's not whether it's about changing the Middle East. That's not about whether Palestine is on a piece of land. That's about that there's a vision for the Middle East, and that's the purpose of those in global power.
But not everybody's going to be as strong politically as you are, but I do think we have a responsibility to step into our own power, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, but I would challenge where immorality is happening.
That we have to stand up.
That we have to take a stand. That there is no, 6 million people were put into gas chambers in Germany. That's what happened. Rwanda happened. All of those things happened, and there weren't people there. Like, they came for the Jews, they came for the trade unions, they came for the gypsies, and when they came for me, there was nobody there. That's not good enough. We're in a different world.
Yeah, perfect. No, time to stand up and be counted. Absolutely, Rita. Anything else you want to add before we finish?
We are the people, and we're united. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We are the people, and we're united. We want a revolution now. La lucha continua.
Thank you very much, Rita, for coming in. That's super.